How's everybody enjoying the cooler weather? It's only 93, I think. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this important panel discussion, Houston and the 2023 legislative session. I am Jay Zambrano, Vice President for Advancement and University Relations here at the University of Houston downtown, and I am thankful for our university's partnership with the Texas Tribune and for the Tribune's commitment to informing all community stakeholders regarding the issues of our beloved state. Thank you all for being here. As you know, our Texas lawmakers closed the 88th legislative session at the end of May. The new legislation directly impacts our state budget, taxes, public education, higher education, and healthcare. Today's panelists will discuss the new bills, their impact on Texans, and what we should know going forward. Your presence today is a testament to your investment in these key issues of our city and state. To the Texas Tribune staff and editor-in-chief, Mr. Sewell Chan, and CEO Sonal Shah, thank you for your contribution to responsible, nonpartisan journalism and your commitment to public engagement and discourse. Your work helps us all to be informed and empowered citizens, armed with the civic information needed to fully participate in our democracy and work toward a more just and sustainable future. It is now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Matt Ewalt, the Texas Tribune's Director of Event and Live Journalism, who will introduce our moderator and panelists.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Ewalt. I serve as Director of Events and Live Journalism for the Texas Tribune. Just want to thank you for joining us in person here in Houston and online for our conversation with Houston lawmakers and community leaders about the 2023 legislative session, what it means for Houston and communities throughout the state. Today's program will be moderated by Texas Tribune CEO Sonal Shah. Our panel will include Senator Carol Alvarado and Taylor Landon of the Greater Houston Partnership. I want to take a couple minutes to thank today's sponsors. Our event is presented by Texas State Technical College and Lone Star College. Our major sponsors include the Hackett Center for Mental Health, the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston, Legacy Community Health, Houston Endowment, and Raise Your Hand, Texas. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. We are also grateful to have leadership from the University of Houston downtown here and for their hospitality in hosting today's event. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank our Texas Tribune members joining us in person and online today. If you value events like this and you're not yet a member, please consider supporting the Tribune. Head to texastribune.org/donate. And the Texas Tribune Festival is happening in downtown Austin this fall from September 21st through 23rd. Join us for a program full of big thinking conversations, headlined by names you know and others you should. And just yesterday, we announced a full slate of Texas leaders from around the state, really demonstrating the depth and breadth of Texas voices that we have coming up at the festival. Some housekeeping notes about today's program. We will have about 45 minutes for our conversation, with 15 minutes for questions from the audience. Please silence your cell phones, and if you'd like to tweet from this event, please use the hashtag #TTEvents. So now let's just meet today's panel. State Senator Carol Alvarado is now in her third term serving District 6 in the Texas Senate. She is Vice Chair of the Senate Select Committee on Ports and a member of the Senate Committees on Administration, Natural Resources and Economic Development, Nominations, Transportation, and the Special Committee on Redistricting. Alvarado also serves as the chair of the Texas Senate Democratic Caucus. Taylor Landon is Chief Policy Officer for Greater Houston Partnership, the principal business organization serving the Greater Houston region. Landon leads a team of public policy and advocacy professionals who work to advance the Houston business community's policy priorities at the federal, state, and local levels. And at the top of the program, you heard me mention our moderator for today is Texas Tribune CEO Sonal Shah, a position as CEO she took over in January. She has started and led social impact efforts in academia, government, and the private and philanthropic sectors for over 25 years. Previously, she served as interim executive vice president at United Way Worldwide. Sonal founded the Asian American Foundation in Houston and founded and led Georgetown University's Beek Center for Social Impact and Innovation. In the private sector, Sonal led Goldman Sachs' environmental strategy and Google's global technology and impact investment initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Sonal Shah, Senator Carol Alvarado, and Taylor Landon.
Well, welcome everybody. You get Sonal Shah instead of Sewell Chan, in case you can't tell. Sewell got caught up on a late flight that got delayed, so I get the pleasure of moderating. So if I'm reading off of a script, it's because I wasn't prepared to moderate today. So I'm going to read off of a script just so I don't miss anything that I want to. But I want to start with, first of all, saying thank you to all of you. Houston is home for me. I grew up in Houston. I grew up in Alief. Alief Hastings, for those of you that are from Alief. And still, my parents still live there, so I'm still a proud Alief fan no matter what. So I go back to the school once a year to visit both Alief Hastings and LSIC to see students and to meet with former teachers, so which is great. We're here today to talk about the legislative session and what happened this year. And it was an eventful session. Nobody thought it would be as eventful at the beginning, but boy, did it end with a bang. And it started off with a conversation really about a huge surplus and how that surplus was going to be used. And then there were many machinations of what happened during this session. So what I'm going to start with is just sort of the very broadest of questions. And then we'll sort of dig into Houston and specifically about various aspects of Houston. So Taylor, I'm going to start with you a little bit. Session was, what did you expect out of this session? What did you think was going to happen? And then what happened?
Well, it's probably a question better for
Oh,
Senator
I'm going
Alvarado.
there, don't worry.
I'll let her think about it for a moment. But I would say from our perspective, you go into session, you have such a surplus budget environment that you're really wondering what type of investments are going to be prioritized by the legislature. Of course, everybody has ideas about that. I understand that there were, literally trillions of dollars that were in front of the appropriators in terms of requests that were getting cataloged. So I would say going into session, that the budget surplus environment was really the big driver. And then I think there's always the unknown about what types of issues will end up kind of popping in such a way that really grab the attention of the media and then therefore drive a lot of the conversations inside of the building. And I think that the session played out, at least from a business community perspective, in a really wonderful way. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about economic development and the issues that are really important to an organization like the Greater Houston Partnership. But I would say, on balance, the session was favorable toward business in a lot of important ways. And that's certainly in the current political environment that we're in. That's not a given going into session.
Yeah, and Senator, your leadership has been critical in the legislature, and really just sort of what were your expectations? But what do you think are your biggest disappointments and biggest wins that came out of this session?
We really need a lot longer than 45 minutes to dig into all of that. I mean, there's a lot to unpack. I wasn't sure I was going to make it today because I've been busy, if you haven't seen the news, the last couple of days for about 20 hours in deliberations and can't really talk a lot about that, but just to say it was very, a very stressful environment. Well, we're here at the University of Houston downtown. I have to say I kind of got lost. I think I accidentally went and signed up for freshman orientation. I've got to go back and get my schedule for my classes, but looking forward to a great semester here. And thank you to Legacy. What a wonderful organization. I see Lindsay here with Legacy and so many friends out in the audience. Big fan of theirs. This session, yes, as Taylor said, a lot of the anticipation was what would we do with this surplus of money? And the big topic that went throughout session, and it's still looming over us, is property tax relief, because we were dedicating almost half of the surplus to property tax relief. And for those of us that are not in the majority, I mean, you look at everything in the state, everything's controlled by one party, and yet we still can't get something done on property tax relief. So meanwhile, we're sitting here, eating popcorn and watching this movie play out. But I think the Senate plan is a really good plan, and I'm sure you want to get into that a little bit more. But there are some things that happened, as you said, it ended with a bang, things that you would have never imagined that could happen in one session. It's really like a movie with a very interesting cast of characters. But we were able to put in a lot more money for education, behavioral health, school safety. Those are the big ticket items. And then, I have two jobs. I am a senator representing a part of Houston, Senate District 6, but I also play a role in leading the Senate Democrats. And that's a really tough job of navigating and finding a balance, working with leadership, working in an environment, a chamber, quite frankly, that is very conservative. I'd say the Senate is more conservative than the state of Texas. And being able to get things done, being able to improve some bills, and HB 5, Democrats weighed in a lot on that, on issues related to the grid. There are issues that Democrats have been championing for several sessions, and they finally got passed, although bills were given to people on the other side of the aisle to carry, but it's okay. A lot of times you can't have pride in ownership as long as it gets done. So we're almost to the end of the first special, anticipating we will have a second, possibly a third, who knows, and then another big event starting September the 5th. So there's really not a break for those of us, especially in the Senate, because even if when we get through with the special sessions, we've got another task this fall.
Yeah, and I'm going to start a little bit with property taxes because we did start there. And just, on one side, there's the governor, the speaker, TPPF, who believe it's possible to eliminate nearly all property taxes for schools. And then Lieutenant Governor, who thinks that it's unrealistic without increasing sales tax and would rather focus on tax relief for homeowners and not commercial property. Like, where do you stand? You sort of laid out a little bit of where you stand on this debate, but why has it become so heated? And do you see it getting resolved in the special session?
Well, I think that, the big three, meaning the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, really have to do a better job of communicating with each other. And I tell people, if there was at least one woman in that group, we wouldn't be in this mess. But there's a pretty stark difference between what the different plans. And if you saw, I'm kind of lost in days because I've been locked up in a room for 2 days. But the Senate plan that was revealed, we put a little bit more into property tax relief. We were at, I think, about $17.6 billion for the total package. We added in another $400,000, so taking it to $18 billion. So that's, well over half of the surplus that we have. And it's not a Democrat-Republican issue. The Senate has been very united. We had a press conference Tuesday on this issue. And it's urban, it's rural, but we believe that raising the homestead exemption to $100,000 is the best thing for homeowners. And we disagree with the House plan to just focus on compression only. But we want a plan that brings relief to y'all, homeowners, but also doesn't hurt the school districts. And that's one thing that the ISDs have come out and said, that the House plan and what the governor wants to do would put school districts in a very difficult spot.
So, Taylor, where is the business community and the Greater Houston Partnership on this?
Yeah,
You
what
know-
side are y'all on? Whose side?
You're not going to bait me into an answer to that question.
I can keep trying.
No, this is, one of the hallmarks of the partnership, and I see Ann Stern is here from our board, and I hope I'm not missing other board members. But our instructions very clearly have been to stay focused on the things that we set out to work on well in advance of session. And property tax is one of the issues that, recognizing, yes, it's really an important issue. It's getting worked out by leaders like Senator Alvarado and others in a way that there's maybe not a unique role, a contribution that an organization like the partnership can play in this debate. So quite simply, we've stayed out of it altogether over the course of the entire session and now into specials. People say, well, you guys are still in session. You must still be, grinding. Are you living in Austin, all that kind of thing. And you won't like to hear this, but I have the luxury now of saying that we're not in those issues. So we're if your issue's not on the call, you stay out of the building. So
That's smart. Stay in your own lane. I'd be doing the same thing if I were you.
And Senator, do we see the property debate being resolved this session? In this particular special session?
This special ends on Tuesday. So unless something happens between now and then, I think it's very unlikely. We will sine die on Tuesday, and then we'll be called back pretty quick because we have to. This has to go to the voters too. You have to vote on this. So we have the enabling legislation, we have the constitutional amendment, and all of that, especially the resolution going to the voters, that has to be resolved by August. I forget the exact date, so that you have enough time to get the language for the ballot. Ballot has to be put in. There's some deadlines to that. So who knows? Maybe with having a gun to your head will motivate you to get something done. But like, as I said, as a Democrat, we're not in control. You've got 3 branches of government led by one party, and I know this issue has been something that many of them have campaigned on. We obviously support it, but we're not in charge. We're, as I said, we're sitting back, eating popcorn, watching the movie, but making sure that people know the difference between the plans. And I will defend the Senate plan all day because it is better for homeowners, for our constituents.
Well, and there were other Republican priorities that didn't actually move out of this session. School choice,
Thank God.
Adding to border security.
Thank God.
Why didn't these priorities move forward?
It wasn't just Democrats that opposed them. There was bipartisan support not to allow vouchers. I don't think it even came up for a vote on the House floor. There was an amendment that was put on by Abel Herrero that basically, shut down. It was a part of the budget that shut it down. And it wasn't just Democrats that voted for the amendment. There were Republicans too. A lot of Republicans in rural parts of Texas had issues with vouchers, and rightfully so. And this is something that was talked about quite a bit. And I respect and really admire them taking a position. Now, some of them, there's been retribution. Some bills have been vetoed, in case you haven't heard, where I think we were up to 74, 76 bills. I carried a bill with a Republican, and our bill was vetoed, and it was based on the voucher issue because this Republican, voted in support of the Herrero amendment that addressed the vouchers in the budget. So that was retribution for that. There was, other things, retribution with vetoes, and we can get into veto power later, but that's how that has played out right now.
Yeah, well, let's move to Houston. We started sort of at the state legislature. We've talked about the priorities there. I'd love to talk a little bit more about what happened for Houston in the state legislature. And Taylor, let me ask you a question here. What do you feel came out of this session that was beneficial for our economy in Houston?
Yeah, I think we'll set aside House Bill 5 for the moment, but when you think about things like funding for flood mitigation, when you and I'll talk through those specifics. Think about there was an inventory tax exemption that was passed related to pharmaceutical manufacturing. As we work to build our life sciences ecosystem here, building off of the incredible asset that we have through the Texas Medical Center, that will become a huge tool, make us more competitive against states like North Carolina and others that very fiercely compete for those life sciences opportunities. Those two jump to mind. You have there was we added 6 additional felony criminal courts. As we all know, there's a criminal case, felony criminal case backlog in Harris County that's pretty profound, and we have not added a criminal court in Harris County I should say we've added 1 criminal court in Harris County in the last 38 years. And the population of the county was something like 2 million at the time, and now it's more than doubled that. And so adding capacity is a necessary part of some of the criminal justice elements. It's certainly not a magic or a cure-all, but it's a part of the equation. So those are very specific to Houston. I hope we get a chance to talk about Senator Whitmire's bill that provides funding for the George R. Brown Convention Center rehabilitation. And so I could go through a list of bills that we should all be really proud of as Houstonians and anybody who lives in this region. The legislature did tremendous work in a lot of areas that will have direct impact on Houston.
I think Senator Whitmire's bill is so interesting because it is a bill that we have been talking about the George R. Brown Convention Center from whenever I can remember. And tell us why it's so important.
Well, it allows a portion of the hotel occupancy tax to be dedicated to into a specific fund to then allow for the funding of projects that will revitalize parts of downtown that we have a wonderful downtown, of course, but I don't think the convention center's had a major renovation in several decades. And the comptroller estimates that the passage of that bill will generate over 30 years, $2 billion. And so that's significant for us to be able to continue to compete for things like World Petroleum Congress, World Cups, Super Bowls. All of those pieces are a part of the equation of us being competitive against places like Orlando and Las Vegas as we go for major conventions. And so it's absolutely necessary. And organizations like Houston First and others that play such a huge role in attracting those types of conventions and major global and national sporting events are really going to benefit from having this fund. And we should appreciate if you fast forward out to 2028, Houston has a very significant either national or international events that will be hosted here in Houston. And so it puts us front and center. It helps us from an economic development, it helps us long-term economic development because it positions Houston as a great global city in addition to the immediate economic impact that we see, in just the event actually taking place here in our city.
And Senator, I think Taylor's point about the economic development that's happening in Houston is going to be super important. There were also some interesting controversial bills that came through. The legislature passed Senate Bill 1750, which forces Harris County to eliminate its chief election official and to give state officials more authority over elections here. Can you talk about that legislation and the debate around that legislation and the real impact?
Well, there was a lot of there were a lot of election bills that came through. Most of them were sponsored by my colleague, Senator Bittencourt. And, we believe it or not, we have a good relationship. And I joked with him because he used to be a county official. And I said, are you sure you don't want to be a county official again? Because you have been so involved in trying to tell Harris County what to do. But, we had several sessions on election and voting last session, and then it just picked up right where it left off last session. And, a lot of this, just, I'll be up front, it's politically driven, it's very partisan, and that's why you saw not just this bill, but many other bills that were going after mainly just Harris County. You might as well have just put it in the bill. They find words, define it by population, but it was an attack on Harris County. And some of the things that were done, like the drive-through voting and 24-hour voting, that as a result, people got to vote in a safe environment during a pandemic. And, oh, by the way, voter turnout did increase. So, there was obviously a lot of issues with the administrator, and we've seen there's a new person now. I have not had a chance to meet that individual, but I think it will probably continue to see a little bit more of that rhetoric as we get closer to the election cycle, and I think we need to move on and focus on things that create jobs, boost our economy, invest in our education system, and we're doing that. But every now and then there's these sidetrack issues that kind of derail what we need to be focused on as a state, and really giving more support to our cities and our counties that are on the ground and are closest to the people. But every session you see more overreach of local control, and it was just at its highest speed this time around. I think Bill Kelly from the city of Houston is here. We appreciate working with them, but cities are really what make our state great. A lot of the things that Taylor just talked about, boosting incentives and amenities for tourism and economic development, a lot of that is done by our cities and our counties, our local government, our local officials. We need to let them do their job.
And so tell us a little bit about representatives and political representatives on both sides in the legislature and how that has worked for the Houston delegation.
The Houston delegation has a very strong group of legislators on both sides. You have people like Representative Armando Wally, who is on appropriations and who was a conferee. That's a big job. You are one of the few people writing the bill. You have the dean, Symphonia Thompson, who yields a lot of power and stature in the legislature, and people are just afraid to mess with her. You don't mess with Miss T. And you have Senator, this is all on both sides of the aisle. You have Senator Joan Huffman, who chairs Senate Finance, and also she's well respected on both sides of the aisle with many issues, but being Finance Chair certainly yields a lot of power. And then you have the Dean of the Senate, Senator Whitmire, who passed the bill that Taylor was just talking about, who is the only Democratic chair in the Senate. And I'm just dreading the day that he leaves, anticipating his win for mayor. But that may be the end of a Democratic chair in the Senate. So, but having him as the dean and a chair of a committee and dealing with issues dealing with criminal justice reform. I passed a lot of bills, including my number one bill, which is the catalytic converter bill, through his committee. Sexual assault, domestic violence issues, those were priorities for him, and those bills of mine that were related to those, we were able to get quick hearings and get our bills passed. And then you have members on, whether it's the calendars committee or influential committees within the Harris County delegation. So we are always well positioned. I'm sure Taylor can tell you this because he has to work with both chambers, members on both sides of the aisles, and Democrats and Republicans in the Harris County delegation are all well placed to have impact and to influence.
Absolutely. I would say, too, you mentioned your catalytic converter bill. We should all appreciate how hard Senator Alvarado worked on that bill. And anybody who is close to the legislature knows that unless you have a committed champion on an important issue, there's no chance of getting a bill over the finish line. And you definitely, you were that champion for that particular issue, and that's the only reason why it was signed by the governor. So, yeah.
Well, I think for Houston, I think Houston came out well in this legislature, and I think there was a lot that came out with it.
Can we talk a little bit about flood funding?
Please.
I think that's really important. Again, another kind of underappreciated part is that maybe there wasn't one bill that passed that got a lot of attention, but if you stack the appropriations made by the legislature, you get upwards of $1.3 billion worth of flood funding. You mentioned Chairman Wally as his role as a comfree. He is responsible for at least half of the $625 million that was appropriated to the flood infrastructure fund. He alone, right, from a budget writer perspective. And so if you stack all of the different pieces of flood mitigation funding, you have $695 million for flood infrastructure fund and administration. You have $600 million for the local portion of the coastal spine through the Gulf Coast Protection District. And then you have $50 million for the Lake Houston Dam project, which is a hugely strategically significant project. And those are things that, again, they don't get the headlines, but they really have an impact on this region. And we have a delegation that's committed to those issues, and it really shows up in the final results.
Yeah, it is one of the more important, especially for Houston, and having gone through enough hurricanes here, it is an important part of that. And let me switch topics a bit here, and I want to talk a little bit about a couple of other issues, and then I'm going to get ready for questions for those who have questions. But just quickly, I want to tap back a little bit into the Harris County piece, and especially about the elections bills that keep coming up here. You know, Liz, I worked on the global side. I worked in global development for a long time. I used to take away money from governments that took away rights of people to have more elections and to make it easier for elections. I actually wonder why in the United States, where I have always been on the other side of this, to say both Republican and Democratic administrations talking about how we get more people to vote and why it matters, how we do that better in not just Texas, but especially in Texas, making it easier for people to vote.
Well, for so many sessions now, I've been filing a bill for online voter registration. It's so simple. It's had bipartisan support, but we can't seem to get anywhere with it. My God, we do everything online. And during the pandemic, we did even more online. We educated kids online, and you did your meetings online, everything, you bank online. And we haven't been able to get anywhere, and it's just very frustrating. Now, some people say, well, we kind of do have online voter registration. If you're renewing your vehicle registration, your license, yeah, you can do that. But it's not if you just want to go, you're a new voter, you want to register, or you move, you cannot do that. So that would be one way to make it easier for people to have access to the ballot box, and then not politicizing the process. And we just continue to see more and more of that taking place. It's unfortunate. I think there are a lot of people in the state that don't vote, and sometimes it's about the candidates. If you don't have good candidates running who can mobilize and energize people, that's a problem. So, and I think too, Democrats are different in Texas. Democrats in Texas are not like Democrats in California or New York. Democrats in Texas are going to be a little more moderate. So when you've got a national campaign going on and issues that resonate with Texans, like fracking and border issues, there's a difference there. When you talk to Democrats that live in border towns, their issue on immigration and border is different than somebody living even in an urban area like Houston, definitely different than a Democrat living in Chicago, New York, or California. So you can't nationalize the campaigns when you're talking to Texas Democrats. So we could
100%.
talk a long time about that. That's probably a better discussion as we get closer to
100%.
an election.
100%. I think it's important that we are able to translate for the country what Texas means, as opposed to vice versa, the country defining what Texas means.
Right. Well, as I say, Texas is a state of mind, and we're different down here.
Absolutely. So one of the big, both of you mentioned the big investments that took place were in mental health, also mandating every school have armed guards. However, one thing that did not pass was the age to buy an AR-15 from 18 to 21, which some of the Uvalde families had been advocating for. Why did that proposal, which was fairly modest, not pass with the school safety? And
again, I think it came down to just a very, and it should not be a very partisan issue. And God bless my colleague, State Senator Roland Gutierrez, who is from San Antonio, represents the Uvalde area. He has been so emotionally invested in this and has been a champion for these issues. Right after the tragedy in Uvalde, the Senate Democrats requested a special session to address gun violence. We didn't get anywhere. We had a package of a bill, issues that we wanted to incorporate into a bill. And by the way, these are issues that poll very well. So, our message to our friends on the other side of the aisle, if you're concerned about your next election and polling, these issues do well because they're common sense. Nobody's trying to take away your gun. We're trying to approach this in a very practical way by raising the age to 21, having background checks. Even some things that were done in Florida after the shooting at the nightclub in Orlando. When Florida legislature came and they immediately passed bills to address some of that. Red flag laws. I think most people, whether you're Democrat or Republican, agree with these issues. But unfortunately, even with the Uvalde families being in the Capitol almost every week and visiting members, I don't know how you can tell a survivor of a family, of a child, that you can't even entertain the idea of raising the age to 21. I don't know how you sleep at night with that type of attitude.
well, I'm going to go to the hopeful side here. We have the census confirmed that Hispanics are now the largest ethnic group in Texas, outnumbering non-Hispanic whites for the first time. What impact do these demographic shifts have on policymaking in the legislature? And are these changing demographics going to be positive in the sense of from contributing to hyperpolarization, or are we going to make real progress in really creating multi-ethnic coalitions?
I see some change. I mean, and it's not anything that gets written up, and it's not something that you can, it takes a little explaining to do. But for example, in HB 5, Democrats in the Senate pushed for these opportunity zones. And if you look at the map of my Senate District 6, it's almost an entirely opportunity zone, but that those areas get preference when it comes to these incentives. And by doing that, you're helping predominant Latino areas for jobs. And that's one of the biggest things you can do is to give somebody an opportunity, give them a job that pays well, that offers benefits, a job that they can be proud to go to every day. So doing some subtle things like that benefit our community. You haven't seen, as in the past, a lot of immigrant bashing in the legislature. I mean, we dealt with that several sessions ago. You do have some of the border funding, security issues that many of us have different issues on how you can approach it. Nobody's advocating on the Democrat side for just completely open borders, but we have a different way of approaching that than spending the amount of money that's dedicated to that and the way that some want it done. Just a difference of opinion of how to protect the border. But I think people realize that the workforce here is what is driving the economy. And if it weren't for many in the Latino community, a lot of the jobs that are, the new hotels we put up, the new highways that we build, that a lot of those jobs would not be filled. I mean, people also recognize the important role that we play when it comes to the economy. When you have a shortage of workers, we have the lowest unemployment rate right now. So if anybody's unemployed, there should not be, a big reason for it, because there are plenty of jobs out there. But a lot of the jobs are being filled by folks in my community that are here to stay. They're paying taxes, they're part of the system. We obviously urge people, get on the path to citizenship, get registered to vote, participate.
Tara, talk a little bit about opportunity zones.
Yeah, so that was Senator Alvarado can tell what happened in the back rooms that resulted in that deal. But when the Senate took up House Bill 5, which is a school property tax abatement program, there was a lot of I'll just say the House version that came over to you guys and then what was passed are two very different pieces of legislation, but it was improved in one key sense, which I know the Senate Democratic Caucus under your leadership pushed for, was the inclusion of these opportunity zones inside of as a qualifying criteria for these projects. And so you get basically an added incentive if your project is located in an opportunity zone. And so it's a great example of how you can craft policy to help disadvantaged communities, and we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, take the energy transition space that the partnership works a lot in. There's a study that we're undertaking right now that's specifically related to the hydrogen economy and the job growth that's expected in that area, and that's in order to maximize the federal incentives that are available. We have to ensure that individuals from disadvantaged communities, to use the federal term, are included in that growth and in that economic opportunity. And we're making a lot of strides in terms of trying to figure out what those pathways look like for individuals to get on a path toward making a living in a part of the energy economy for Houston that's just going to boom in the next decade plus.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to go to questions. So there's two mics, one here and one here. And if you come up, if you wouldn't mind just stating your name, and then please stick to a question.
My name is Paul Colbert. Good to see you, Senator. So the Texas Homeschool Coalition claims that there are about 750,000 homeschool kids in Texas. The Texas Private School Association claims that there are about 250,000. That's 1 million kids who are not currently in public education. The voucher proposals ranged from $8,000 to almost $12,500 per kid. And it's the stated goal of the leadership that all kids, or all parents have their kids, receive these vouchers. Where do your colleagues in the Senate who passed the voucher bills and the leadership expect to get, because if you add that up, that would be $8 billion to $12.5 billion or in a biennium, $16 to $25 billion in money we're not currently spending on education. And when you add that amount to the $18 billion in new property tax relief or compression, we're talking about $35 to $40 billion. That's about 30% of the state total tax collections. Where in the heck do they expect we will get the money to do that and still be able to provide for improvements and just dealing with inflation in public education?
For those of you who don't know Paul, Paul is a former state representative who had a very distinguished career in the Texas legislature and has always been the go-to guy when it comes to education. So I'm happy to see you. But you raise up some really good points, and that's why I'm very grateful to some smart folks in the House, whether it was Republican members in leadership in the House or rural members that understood just what you're talking about, how this would hurt our public education system. And now we're seeing more kids that are becoming homeschool, and I'm sure we could talk about that for a while, because I guess it's, it increased after the pandemic. It's a way that people got used to and comfortable educating their kids, but we cannot have a voucher system that bleeds our public education system. We can't afford it.
That's $35 to $40 billion.
Absolutely.
If not a single kid leaves a public school for private education.
You can't do that and then have property tax relief. They go hand in hand.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Sonal, can I talk a little bit about public education? I think that there's, we at the Greater Houston Partnership spend, it's an evergreen issue for us. And we have long been very committed to public school education. And what we know is that, yes, funding is absolutely important, and anything that undermines current funding is something that, we're going to have to take a real close look at. But I will say that some of the discussion around education gets missed because there are at least two things, and I'm going to simplify this, but there are two things that we know work. Kids have to read on grade level by the third grade, and you have to put your most challenging teachers, or your best teachers, in the most challenging classrooms. And if you can do those two things, you at least give students a fighting chance to get to the first step toward having a great job and being really contributing to their communities. And so there is a lot of noise in the education space for obvious reasons, because people are really passionate about it. But I think that the conversation needs, if we ideally would focus more on the kids and outcomes than adults and arguing about different how we get there.
And I want to thank the partnership, because education has always been one priority in your package of your legislative priorities. So thank y'all for always being mindful of that. It's the future workforce. So.
Absolutely.
And thank you for bringing it back to outcomes, because it's easy to get caught up in the debates of what bill is which, but really at the end of the day, question is what outcomes, and can we get to outcomes? Right here.
Yes. My name is Derek Brose. I'm a journalist and activist here in the city. I'm also currently a candidate for mayor of Houston. I wanted to ask about HB 2127, the so-called Death Star bill, and just sort of, for those who are not aware, this is restricting several different areas of local power, and there still isn't clarity about how far in depth it goes. But I just wanted to put this in the context, since we're here in Houston talking about Houston. We're currently already dealing with a situation where we have a strong mayor position that gets to decide what goes on the agenda, what gets voted on. City council is pretty much neutered. And then on top of that, now we're going to have a state saying local power is even more restricted. So I guess the question is, do we have any clarity on how far that bill is really going to go, and any suggestions on how to empower people who are maybe going to feel even more disempowered after these bills?
The bill is very extreme, and as I said earlier on another question, that the legislature continues to overreach and diminish local control. And I served on city council, and I worked in a administration, I was a senior aide to Mary Lee Brown, so I've been on both sides of city government, and you've got to let people do their job. And I argue so much with my colleagues. I said, if you want to be in charge of all that, then run for city council, run for mayor, don't be in the legislature. And, council members, most people know who their council members are before they know who their legislative representative is. So, some of us were joking with them, hey, we hope that they're going to start calling you now and not their council member, because state government is overreaching so much. But that bill limits a lot of what cities can do. And the only thing I suggest you can do is you mobilize people, and the next set of elections, primaries and general election, that's the only way you're going to change it.
Right here.
Hey, good afternoon. So my name is Cody West. I work for an investment firm where we make investments in opportunity zones. So we finance a number of different projects ranging from multifamily, medical office, mixed use. So my question is in relation to HB 5. So first off, thanks to the senator for including opportunity zones in the Senate version, because the House version didn't include it. But whenever I reviewed the bill, I noticed that non-dispatchable electricity storage and generation projects weren't included. So for the senator, I would like to know, do you have any idea on why that wasn't a part of the, I guess, the bill? And then also to Taylor, I would like to know if the Greater Houston Partnership advocated to include non-dispatchable electricity projects.
So why non-dispatchable power and battery storage was not included in the legislation there's probably a political motivation for that. I won't speak to that. What I will say is that yes, we did advocate for the inclusion of both dispatchable and or non-dispatchable and battery storage to be included. They were in the House bill originally, at least the battery storage components were. And then they came out in the Senate version, and so what we were focused on was ensuring that at least a framework of a program got over the finish line this session, so that we can have a foundation to work from in upcoming sessions to improve upon a program. We've already talked about the opportunity zones. Improvement. I mean, there's multiple ways that you can take the House Bill 5 that passed and continue to iterate and improve on that legislation going forward. And I suspect that the power issue and battery storage will be a big part of those discussions.
And that's something we wanted. Senate Democrats didn't prevail on that. So I think unfortunately it got caught up in a probably more political angle than anything else, and not substance, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is John Roundtree. I'm an assistant professor here at UHT. So there were a lot of higher education bills that came through the legislature, and I was just hoping that you could talk a little bit about what changes we should expect to see based on those bills to higher education.
Well, for once, I mean, we're finally going to we're addressing the disparities that institutions like the University of Houston system has been under. Certainly more funding for the University of Houston system, Texas Tech, and I believe the other one was UNT?
North Texas and Texas State.
North Texas and Texas State. So putting more money in research. Hopefully we can attract more faculty to our institutions. But yes, a big win for the University of Houston system. And we have been, many of us have been advocating for that, because under the PUF, the Permanent University Fund, there are only two universities who benefit from that, the University of Texas and Texas A&M. And it's long overdue that some of our other institutions, well-deserving, equally on par when it comes to research and academic success, have been left out of, and finally, we're now starting to see, it's going to take a while to catch up, but at least we have made some reforms in that.
And I think that bill that creates the Texas University Fund and creates that new permanent endowment with $3.4 billion it really cannot be overstated how important that is to a system like the University of Houston, where when you look at the University of Houston is the closest system in the state to top 50 status. Yep. And as you get toward top 50 status, it gives you, it unlocks a lot of funding opportunities, allows you to attract different pool of professor candidates, and it's a tremendous advantage to be at or in the top 50 or near. And we've worked very closely with the University of Houston specifically to elevate the issue of higher education in the region so that we can help them on their path to top 50. But the reason for that is that for all the reasons I just said, but what we found in the work with them is that on all of the various measures, they're performing at or above where they should be, and the difference between continuing on that path to top 50 is funding. And so we think that the Texas University Fund and the $3.4 billion gives them an opportunity to continue on that path.
There's the money side, but do either of you worry about like the tenure bills and attracting professors to come work in Texas and to participate? I mean, as the state is growing, we want to attract some of the best here. Do you worry about that?
Absolutely. I mean, aside from the tenure issue, we've heard from various institutions, because of some of the extreme bills that have been passed in the state, mainly dealing with social issues, they have chosen not to come here. So that does impact the ability for our universities to attract the best and the brightest. And now the tenure bill is only going to pile on for that issue. It's a grave concern.
Right here.
Hi, my name is Val Gray. I'm a public policy student at the University of Houston. So this session has really been historically devastating for LGBT Texans, and particularly the transgender community. We know that mental health is a huge issue across the United States and in Texas, and it's particularly an issue for the LGBT community, and particularly transgender people again. And we also know that by far the most effective treatment for depression and risk of suicide among specifically transgender people is gender-affirming care, which has been thoroughly attacked in this session. So I'm wondering what the Texas Democrats, and you in particular, are hoping to be able to do and are planning to do to protect the well-being and safety of LGBT, and again, particularly transgender Texans going forward.
Yeah, we've been very vocal. We've been extremely supportive of those issues, and it has become probably one of the most divisive and hot-button issues this session. There were many advocates that came to the Capitol. We had private conversations with leadership to back off some of these issues, and unfortunately, that's another issue that has become just extremely divisive. And again, goes back to what I said earlier, the gentleman that was asking about the local control bills, is that if you want change, you take that fight to the ballot box.
Thank you.
And thank you for your advocacy.
Well, I want to say thank you to both of you for coming here today for this conversation. Important because this legislative session had so many important pieces, many more still to come with more legislative sessions. Hopefully you will be done with the special sessions by the time we get to the Texas Tribune Festival, September 21 to 23rd. Just a plug there. But more importantly, I think what the senator said and what I think we have to all pay attention to is please pay attention to what happens in the legislative sessions because it matters to all of us on not just the times when the legislature's running, but also when it isn't, because it matters every day, the implementation of the bills and how it affects our lives and our communities. So thank you all for coming here. Thank you both for coming, and please do stay tuned. Thank you.